My name is Ava Langley. I used to sit at the edge of my bed and wonder what it would feel like to be wanted. It wasn't that they were cruel, not in the way that bruises showed or voices raised. My adoptive parents, David and Helen Langley, were far too respectable for that. They believed in polite smiles and scheduled dinners, church on Sundays and charity auctions in the spring. From the outside, we looked perfect: the tidy house, the manicured lawn, the matching holiday sweaters, but inside, there was a silence that stretched through every hallway, especially when it came to me. They had a real daughter, my sister Emily, 2 years older and born to them after years of trying. I was the gift they brought home in between, a stopgap solution when they thought their prayers had gone unanswered. I didn't understand that at the time. I only knew that no matter what I did, I was always just slightly outside the circle. I could be quiet, obedient, even helpful, but I wasn't her. Emily glowed in their presence. I simply passed through it. When I was younger, I tried harder. I remember coloring cards for Mother's Day, slipping them under my mom's bedroom door before school. She'd pat my head when I got home and say, "That was sweet, Ava." But her smile didn't reach her eyes. She never hung them up on the fridge the way she did with Emily's crooked crayon rainbows. My dad was quieter, not mean, just distant. He watched baseball with Emily, taught her how to throw a ball, showed her how to change a tire. He once let me hold the flashlight. I learned early not to ask for much. A no came quicker when the question came from me. School trips, birthday parties, even help with homework. I figured it out on my own. It became a game in my head. How invisible can I be and still exist? But that kind of invisibility stains you, even when you try to wash it off. I remember once, in the 5th grade, a teacher asked us to draw our families. Everyone around me sketched mothers and fathers with big smiles and arms wide open. I sat there with my pencil frozen above the paper, unsure how to draw someone who looked through me instead of at me. Eventually, I drew 3 stick figures holding hands and one small girl standing beside them, reaching but not quite touching. I told the teacher it was just a mistake. I erased her name from the corner before I turned it in. They never said they didn't love me. They didn't have to. Love is louder than words, and their silence screamed. Still, I held on to hope. I thought maybe if I made the honor roll, or helped more around the house, they'd notice. I stopped telling them when I was sick. I stopped asking to be tucked in. I smiled when I didn't feel like it. I thanked them for dinners I cooked myself. The older I got, the more the gaps widened. Emily had friends over. I stayed in my room. She got a new phone when hers cracked. I inherited her old one after 3 years. She talked about her dreams, about college, about maybe moving to New York someday. No one ever asked me what I wanted to be. I think they assumed I'd stay close, small, manageable. It wasn't always painful. Some days were just numb. There were moments, though, where the distance felt like a wound that never stopped reopening. Like the time I got my period at school for the first time and didn't know what to do. I called home from the nurse's office. My mom sighed and said, "Can't the nurse handle it?" When I got home, there was a box of pads tossed on my bed. No note, no conversation. I sat in the bathroom alone, figuring it out like I always did, quietly, carefully, without making a mess. By the time I turned 13, I stopped pretending it would get better. I stopped waiting to be seen. I made my peace with being the ghost in their house. The girl in the corner of the photo, the one who was there but not really. I still remember the night before my dad's birthday trip. We were supposed to drive out to the mountains for a weekend getaway. Emily was excited. She packed her bag 3 days early. I asked Helen if I should pack too, and she blinked, as if surprised I was coming. "Of course," she said quickly, "you're part of the family." I told myself that maybe this trip would be different. Maybe being away from home would shake something loose in them, remind them that I was still there. Maybe, just maybe, they'd see me. Looking back now, I don't know whether I was naive or just desperate, but I held onto that hope, even as I packed my bag in silence, even as we drove away from the house and into what I thought was another chance. I had no idea that by the time the trip ended, I wouldn't have a family to come back to. The morning we left for the trip, it rained. Not heavy rain, just that quiet drizzle that makes the sky look tired. I remember watching it slide down the car window as we pulled out of the driveway. Emily was in the front seat, humming along to some pop song on the radio. My mom was fussing with the GPS, and my dad was in one of his rare good moods. cracking the kind of dry jokes that only made him laugh. No one asked if I was excited. No one really spoke to me at all. I sat in the back, next to a cooler filled with sandwiches and soda cans, trying not to take up too much space. I had packed my book, a hoodie, and a hope I didn't want to admit to. A hope that maybe, somewhere between the mountain roads and gas station coffee, I'd be let in, not just physically, but emotionally. Maybe we'd talk. Maybe they'd remember I was there. Maybe this time would be different. We drove for hours, past the city limits, through small towns where houses leaned a little too far, and gas stations stood like fading relics from some forgotten decade. The conversations in the front seat were light, full of inside jokes I wasn't part of. I watched the trees blur by, trying to pretend it didn't matter. I told myself that this was just what families were like. Not every child was the favorite. Maybe I was expecting too much. Around noon, we stopped at a gas station just outside a place called Willow Creek. It wasn't much, just a rickety building with peeling paint, a flickering open sign, and two dusty pumps. My dad pulled in, muttering something about needing to use the restroom and stretch his legs. Emily jumped out to grab snacks. My mom stayed in the car, scrolling through her phone. I asked if I could use the restroom Helen didn't look up. Fine, she said. Make it quick. Inside, the station smelled like old coffee and cigarettes. The clerk behind the counter looked half asleep, flipping through a magazine. I followed the flickering fluorescent lights to a narrow hallway in the back, found the women's room, and locked the door behind me. I don't remember how long I was in there. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe 15. I washed my hands, adjusted the hem of my sweatshirt, and looked at myself in the cracked mirror. My face looked pale, unsure, like someone caught between belonging and being forgotten. I told myself not to cry. It was just a road trip, just a day. When I stepped outside, the parking lot was empty. At first, I thought maybe they'd moved the car. Maybe my dad had decided to park closer to the front. I walked to the edge of the building and looked around. Nothing. No silver sedan, no voices, no familiar faces, just the wind and the sound of a truck passing on the highway. I stood there for a minute, heart racing, mind flipping through rational explanations like pages in a manual. Maybe they drove up the road to find a better spot. Maybe they were circling back. Maybe it was a joke. I walked back inside and asked the clerk, "Did you see where the car went? The one with the woman and the two girls?" He shrugged. "They left a while ago. Thought they were done." I stepped back outside. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I started to panic. I didn't have a phone. Mine had stopped working a week before, and no one had offered to replace it. I had no way to call them. No numbers memorized. Nothing but the clothes on my back and the $20 in my hoodie pocket. Eventually, I approached a woman pumping gas. I asked if I could borrow her phone. She hesitated but handed it over. I dialed home, my fingers shaking. The phone rang once, twice. Then someone picked up. My father's voice. Calm, amused. "Hello? It's me," I said. "It's Ava. You left me at the gas station. I don't know where you went." There was a pause and then laughter, a sharp, grating laugh I didn't recognize. "Let's see how she finds her way back," he said. "It's just a joke." My breath caught. What? More laughter in the background. Emily's voice. My mother's, a blur of muffled amusement. "You'll be fine," he said. "You're always figuring things out, aren't you?" And then click, the line went dead. I stood there, still holding the phone, the world spinning around me. I handed it back to the woman without a word and walked to the curb. I sat down. My legs didn't feel steady. My mind couldn't make sense of what just happened. It was like the ground had given way, and I was free falling through something I couldn't name. I waited. I kept thinking they'd come back, that this joke would end, that they'd drive up laughing, open the door, and tell me to get in. But the sun began to set, and no one came. The night I spent outside that gas station was the longest night of my life. I stayed on the curb until the sky turned dark, the asphalt beneath me radiating the heat it had soaked up all day. Cars came and went, headlights sweeping past me like ghosts. A few people glanced my way, most didn't. I must have looked like I was waiting for someone, and for a while I was. Even after that phone call, even after the laughter and the click of the line, a part of me believed it couldn't be real. They wouldn't do that, not really, not to a child, not to me. I was quiet, good, patient. I never broke rules, never talked back. I didn't deserve this. But the hours kept passing, and the road stayed empty. Every sound that echoed down the highway gave me a moment of hope. And then disappointment. The sky shifted from orange to violet to black. The air turned cold. I wrapped my arms around myself and waited. No one came. At some point, the clerk from the gas station came out and asked if I was okay. I lied. I said my parents were coming back for me, just running late. He nodded and walked away. I think he knew I was lying, but he didn't push. People don't like to get involved with things that make them uncomfortable, and nothing is more uncomfortable than a child who's been left behind. Eventually, I curled up behind the station near the dumpsters. It was the only place with any cover from the wind. I kept my hood up and held my backpack like it was a shield. I didn't sleep. I just watched the stars and tried not to cry aloud. The next morning, someone from a nearby shop saw me and called the police. They brought me to a local station, asked me questions I didn't know how to answer. I told them my name. I gave them our address. I repeated the story about the road trip. The gas station, the phone call. They nodded, scribbled things on clipboards, tried not to look at me too long. They called the Langley house. No one answered. Later that day, a woman from Child Protective Services came in. Her name was Trina. She had tired eyes and a soft voice, the kind people use when they know the truth but aren't ready to say it. She told me they were going to take me somewhere safe for now, and that they'd figure it out. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, she said gently, but I saw the look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't watching. She knew it. Was in single quotes. They placed me in an emergency foster home that night. The woman who took me in was kind enough, but distant. Her house was crowded with other kids, some loud, some silent, all carrying stories no one really asked about. I was just another file on the desk, another number in the system. Days turned to weeks. The Langleys never called back, never answered letters, never filed a missing person report. After a month, the social workers stopped using words like temporary. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't lost. I was discarded. There's something shattering about realizing you've been erased. Not by fate or accident, but by people who chose to forget you. People who raised you. People who once looked at you and said the word family. The system moved me around. Some homes were better than others, some were safe, some were not. I learned how to pack my things quickly. I learned how to sleep with one eye open. I learned not to trust smiles that came too quickly or promises that sounded too sweet. I also learned how to survive. School became my only constant. I clung to it like a lifeline. I read everything I could get my hands on, textbooks, novels, anything that made me feel like I had a future bigger than the four walls I was in. I stopped asking for help. I did my own homework, filled out my own forms, signed my own permission slips. By 15, I had a part-time job cleaning tables at a diner. By 16, I was taking community college classes at night while still in high school. I worked weekends, holidays, and all summer long. I bought my own clothes, paid for my own textbooks, ate when I could afford to. No one ever came looking for me. No one wrote. No one explained. No one even asked where I went. The Langleys had simply edited me out of their story. Like I was a paragraph they regretted writing. But even then, even in the exhaustion and the hunger and the endless cycle of moving and starting over, I refused to vanish. I didn't know what I was surviving for yet, but I knew I had to. There were nights I cried, nights I couldn't sleep, nights I stared at the ceiling and asked the dark, why wasn't I enough? But those nights became fewer as I kept moving forward. I told myself that I didn't need closure, I didn't need revenge, I didn't need them, I just needed a life of my own, something I could build with my own hands, my own name. And I was going to find it. By the time I turned 20, I had stopped thinking of myself as someone who had been abandoned. Not because it didn't matter anymore, it did, but because if I kept carrying that word, abandoned, everywhere I went, it would weigh down everything I was trying to build. I couldn't change the past, but I could make damn sure it didn't write my future. I was renting a room in the back of an old house in a part of town most people avoided after dark. The ceilings leaked when it rained. The heater was unreliable. And the woman upstairs fought with her boyfriend every other night, but it was mine. My name was on the lease. My key opened the door. That mattered more than anyone could understand. Most days, I worked 2 shifts. I waited tables at a small diner in the mornings, then cleaned offices at night. On weekends, I babysat for a couple in the suburbs who never asked questions. My feet were always sore. My hands were always cracked. I couldn't afford health insurance, and ramen noodles were still a staple of my diet. But I paid my own bills. I bought second-hand clothes. I opened a savings account, even if I only put in $10 at a time. I was surviving, but surviving wasn't enough anymore. One night, after a long shift, I was cleaning the break room of a law office downtown. The place was quiet, everyone gone. The floor still warm under the lights. I remember pausing in front of a framed law degree hanging in one of the offices. The name was printed in crisp gold letters, Danielle Roberts, Juris Doctor. I don't know why that moment hit me so hard. Maybe it was the stillness, maybe it was the way her name looked, like a badge of belonging. She had earned something, carved her way into a place where people listened when she spoke, and all I could think was, why not me? I didn't say it out loud. I barely let myself feel it. But the question clung to me like a second skin. The next week, I went to the local community college and picked up a brochure for their paralegal certification program. I read it cover to cover, then hid it under my mattress like it was something I wasn't supposed to want. I kept working, kept saving. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. Who would I tell? Eventually, I applied. The first semester nearly broke me. I was exhausted all the time, rushing from work to class, barely keeping up. I fell asleep with textbooks on my chest, sometimes still in my uniform. I missed meals, missed deadlines, missed parties I was never invited to, but every time I held a legal brief in my hands, something inside me clicked. The structure, the logic, the clarity. It was like a language I had always been waiting to speak. I didn't just want to learn the law. I wanted to wield it. I wanted to understand how people like the Langleys could erase someone and still keep everything. I wanted to know how documents could build or bury a person's existence. I didn't want revenge, I wanted fluency in the systems they used to silence me. When I finished the certification, I went further. I applied for law school. I didn't have a safety net, no family backing me, no trust fund or second chances. But I had grit, I had years of surviving, of hustling, of learning how to bend without breaking. And I had one other thing most people didn't. An unshakable fire in my chest that refused to go out. When the acceptance letter came, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding it like it might disappear. It wasn't a prestigious school, it wasn't a full ride, but it was mine. In class, I was quieter than most. I didn't join the cliques or attend the mixers. I didn't have the time or energy to pretend I belonged. But I studied like my life depended on it, because it did. I spent weekends buried in case law and nights drafting mock briefs while my classmates went drinking. I learned how to argue, how to question, how to find the truth buried beneath half-spoken answers. Every paper I wrote, every exam I passed, every time a professor called me Ms. Langley without knowing the weight that name carried, I grew. I became someone, and somewhere along the way, I stopped asking why they left me, because I realized they didn't break me, they freed me. If they had kept me, I might have spent my whole life waiting to be enough, waiting for scraps of love, for nods of approval, for a seat at a table that was never built for me. Instead, they gave me a gift they never meant to give: distance. The space to become something without them. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was something entirely my own. It started with a name on a piece of mail. I had just moved into a shared apartment with 2 other law students. It was small, noisy, and smelled like takeout and overcooked ambition. We rotated dish duty, argued over laundry times, and stayed up till late with outlines and flashcards. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the closest thing to a home I'd had in years. One afternoon, while sorting through a stack of mail on the counter, I saw it, a thick envelope addressed to Mr. David Langley. It had been misdelivered, probably meant for someone down the hall with a similar number. Still, for a second, I froze. Just seeing the name, written in that impersonal serif font, sent a ripple down my spine. I hadn't said their names out loud in years. I hadn't needed to. But something cracked open in me that day. Some sleeping part of my memory stirred. I stared at that name until the letters blurred. Then I slipped the envelope into the outbox for red livery and went back to my room. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Up until then, I had spent years pretending the past didn't matter. I had built a life from scratch, laid brick after brick with calloused hands. I thought forgetting was the same as healing. But that envelope reminded me of a truth I hadn't wanted to face. I didn't know what had happened to them, and deep down, I needed to. That weekend, I stayed up late in the law library. Combing through public records databases, at first, I told myself it was just curiosity, just a way to practice my research skills, but that was a lie. I needed answers. It was shockingly easy to find them. The Langleys still lived in the same house, the same one I'd memorized the address for when I was 8, same zip code, same square footage. It was all there in county records. I found property deeds, tax assessments, and utility bills. They hadn't moved, not even once. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling my chest tighten. They hadn't run, they hadn't gone bankrupt. They just left me, and then went on living like nothing ever happened. They even still had the same landline number listed. I copied it down but didn't call. I wasn't sure what I would say or if I could speak at all. Over the next few weeks, I kept digging. It became a kind of obsession, my own private case file. I pulled records from the registrar's office. I traced bank accounts, tax liens, old business registrations. I learned that David had taken out a second mortgage 5 years ago, that Helen had been sued for credit card debt but settled out of court, that Emily had gotten married and divorced within 3 years. None of that surprised me, but one thing did. Buried deep in probate records, under the name Raymond Langley, was a will, dated just 3 months before his death. Raymond Langley, David's father, had passed away during my second year of high school, long after they'd discarded me, and in that will, plain as day, was my name, to Ava Langley, whom I consider my grandchild in every way that matters. I leave the house at 200 for Greenbrier Lane and full executor rights to the family trust. I read that line 5 times. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it must be an error, but the file was real, signed, witnessed, notarized, filed legally, my name, my inheritance, and they had never told me. The house they still lived in was legally mine. The trust they were using to maintain their lifestyle, the very lifestyle they'd tossed me out of, was under my control. If I had known earlier, I could have changed everything. But they had buried it, ignored it, pretended it didn't exist. The betrayal wasn't just emotional now. It was legal, tangible, documented. They had lied by omission, stolen by silence. They had spent 12 years living under a roof I had a rightful claim to: money, security, everything, while I scrubbed toilets and lived off rice and frozen vegetables. But this time, I wasn't powerless. I spent the next several months gathering every piece of evidence I would need to reclaim what was mine. I requested certified copies of the will, the trust documents, the probate filings. I took notes like I was preparing for a trial. In a way, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about identity. They had written me out of their story, but here was proof in the most legal, binding form that I had always mattered, that someone saw me, believed in me, loved me in a way they never did. Raymond had seen me, and I would honor that. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not my roommates, not my professors, not even the kind woman at the records office who asked if I was okay. I kept it all locked inside. Quiet power, focused pain. I didn't cry, not then. I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing love or acceptance. I was coming for the truth, and I was almost there. There's a stillness that comes with clarity, not peace. Not quite, but a sharp, focused stillness that settles into your bones when you know exactly what you have to do. That was what I felt after I printed the final set of documents, a sense of gravity. A quiet certainty. I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't plotting some grand confrontation or revenge fantasy. I wasn't interested in making a scene. I just wanted to finish what they started. They erased me. I was writing myself back in legally, irrevocably. I began the process the way any good attorney would. Deliberately, I hired a small, discreet firm to send a formal inquiry to the local court about enforcement of the will and trust. I kept my name off the front line, using a legal proxy to avoid any early alerts. I wasn't ready for them to know it was me. Not yet. Behind the scenes, I filed the necessary motions to gain full control of the trust as executor. The paperwork was airtight, the will unchallenged. The house was listed under the Langley name, but the deed traced back to Raymond, and the transfer of ownership had never been properly updated. It had been overlooked or ignored. Maybe they assumed the legalities didn't matter because I wasn't coming back, but I had. I spent long nights drafting affidavits, pulling historical property tax records, organizing the trust's bank transactions line by line. The estate had been bleeding money for years, quietly, slowly, Nothing catastrophic, but enough to show mismanagement. There were missed payments, overdrawn accounts. A small loan that never got repaid. It told a story of carelessness. They'd grown comfortable in what they thought was permanent, secure in the belief that I'd vanished without a trace. I imagined them sitting at the same kitchen table I once ate breakfast at. Never once wondering what it caused to leave a child behind. Never once imagining that child might come back. But they hadn't just forgotten me. They'd forgotten the law. I petitioned the court for a scheduled review. It was set for the following month. I marked it in my calendar like a quiet secret, not with anger, not with excitement. Just with resolution, still in the quieter moments. Doubt would creep in. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and hear Helen's voice in the back of my mind, telling me I was dramatic, telling me not everything was about me. That I should be grateful, that I should move on. I'd hear David's laughter, that dry, mocking laugh, as if the world were one long joke at my expense. It took everything in me to push those voices away. They no longer defined me. They no longer got to explain me to myself. I had evidence now. I had structure, dates, signatures, facts, the kind of truth you can print and bind and present in a courtroom. The kind of truth that doesn't need to raise its voice. But underneath the legal precision, there was something else building, something less polished. A storm I hadn't let myself feel for years. It rose in fragments, flashbacks, nights spent in strangers' homes, the silence in the car rides. The way Emily looked at me when I asked to borrow a sweater, as if even my need for warmth was an inconvenience. The way my mother could make me feel invisible without saying a single word, and then, always, the gas station, the wind on my neck, the cold silence of the empty parking lot, the sound of the phone call cutting off, the click. Some part of me still lived in that moment. Some part of me never left, but that was about to change. One morning, I received notice that the Langley household had been served. The documents had been delivered in person, no warning. Just a firm knock on the door and the sudden shift of reality, landing at their feet. I wasn't there to see it, but I imagined it clearly. Helen answering the door with a polite smile, taking the envelope without looking too closely, assuming it was something mundane. David peering over her shoulder, still in his slippers. Emily visiting with her son, pausing mid-sip of tea, and then the realization. My name, my claim, my signature. I imagined the silence that followed. The paper in Helen's hands, David's slow frown, Emily's sudden stillness. And I wondered, did they say my name out loud? Did they remember what they did? Did they know I was coming? It didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for their reaction. I was doing it because it was rightfully mine, not just the house. Not just the trust, but the story. My place in the lineage they tried to erase. I had already won the moment I signed those papers with steady hands and my full name. Ava Langley, not the orphan, not the afterthought. Not the girl they left behind, but the woman who remembered everything and used it. I hadn't seen their faces in over a decade. 12 years had passed since the day they left me at that gas station. Since the night I curled behind a dumpster wondering what I'd done to be unwanted. Time didn't erase the image, but it changed its weight. It stopped feeling like something I carried on my back and started feeling like something I carried in my blood. A map, a reason, a truth I never let go of. But as I pulled into the driveway of the house that was now legally mine, something twisted in my chest. Not fear, I was long past that, not vengeance either, just a kind of still ache. Like walking back into a place that once pretended not to see you. It was a quiet neighborhood, still trapped in the same dull calm I remembered. The same cracked sidewalk, the same swing creaking in the neighbor's yard, the same blooming hydrangeas in the front garden, except this time, I wasn't walking up the steps hoping to be loved. I was walking in as the owner. My heels clicked softly against the pavement. I wore a charcoal gray suit, nothing flashy, but sharp, clean. I had tied my hair back tightly, not to look intimidating, but to feel held together. I carried a leather folder with all the documents neatly inside. And when I raised my hand to knock on the door, I didn't tremble. It was Helen who answered. She looked older, of course, her hair grayer, her shoulders more slumped, but the expression hadn't changed. That carefully curated mask of politeness that always had a thread of ice behind it. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. I watched it happen, the flicker in her eyes, the confusion, and then the slow spreading horror of recognition. Her lips parted. Ava, I didn't smile. Hello, Helen, she blinked. What are you doing here? There was a pause behind her, and then a voice, sharp, skeptical, David's. Who is it? And then he appeared, standing just over her shoulder, still tall, still confident in that brittle, careless way. He squinted at me. Is this Ava? The word sounded strange coming out of his mouth, as if it didn't belong to me anymore, as if saying it summoned something they thought they had buried. Then came Emily. She walked down the hallway holding a mug of coffee, and when she saw me, she froze, her face paled. She didn't say a word. I didn't step inside, I didn't ask if it was a good time. I simply opened the folder and held out the documents. I'm here as the legal executor of Raymond Langley's trust, I said, voice even. I'm also the named beneficiary of this property. Helen reached for the papers with trembling hands. David made a sound like a dry cough, half a laugh. What is this, some kind of stunt? I looked at him directly for the first time in 12 years. No, it's a correction. He tried to brush it off. Come on, Ava, we thought you were gone. We didn't know where you were. We thought you thought I'd disappear. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You left me, you never came back, you told me it was a joke. And then you stopped answering. You never even filed a missing persons report. Don't insult me by pretending now. Emily shifted behind them, her eyes darting to the floor. I could see the cracks beginning, the unraveling I had spent so many nights imagining. But none of it gave me joy. This wasn't satisfaction. This was reckoning. I filed for full transfer of the property, including the contents of the trust. Your legal residency here is no longer valid, I said quietly. I've given you 30 days. Helen was pale. You can't mean that. This is our home. No, I said, it was mine all along. Your father made that clear in his will. You just chose to ignore it. David tried to speak again, but the words didn't come for once. He had nothing to say. I turned to leave. I didn't need to see them plead. I didn't want tears. I didn't want apologies twisted in defensiveness. I didn't even want answers. I only wanted the silence to end. At the edge of the porch, I stopped and turned back just once. They were still standing in the doorway, watching me like I was a ghost. You left me to find my way back, I said. Well, I did. Their faces were unreadable, and I didn't care. I walked away without looking back again. The next morning, my inbox was filled with noise, emails from their attorney, voicemails from an unknown number I didn't need to guess. I didn't listen to any of them. I had already made my position clear, not just legally but emotionally. I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't there to explain. I was there to execute what had already been written into law. Still, I opened each message and saved it, carefully, methodically, just in case they tried to twist the narrative I'd learned long ago. The power of documentation. People say all kinds of things when they're cornered, when the world they built on quiet lies begins to collapse. My job wasn't to react. My job was to keep the record straight. A few days after I served the documents, their lawyer requested a meeting. I agreed, not out of obligation but control. I wanted them to understand that this wasn't a bluff. It wasn't emotional. It was legal. It was final. The meeting took place in a neutral office downtown, a sterile, glass-walled conference room, with a view of the city stretching out like a promise. Their lawyer was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit. He smiled too easily. His handshake was too firm. He called me Ms. Langley like it was a name he'd practiced just that morning. Thank you for agreeing to this, he said. My clients David and Helen are feeling quite overwhelmed. Naturally, I echoed. He sat across from me, folding his hands like he was preparing to speak to a child. I think we can agree that this situation is complicated, emotionally charged. Perhaps a resolution can be reached that honors everyone's feelings. I met his eyes. There's no ambiguity in the will or in the trust or in the property deed. This isn't a negotiation. He cleared his throat. They didn't know about the documents. They assumed I'd disappear, that no one would ever question it, that I was disposable. I leaned in, calm, clear, but I didn't disappear. I studied the law. I studied their law. I built my career on understanding people who think the rules only apply when they benefit them. And I promise you, every detail of this was done exactly by the book. He didn't interrupt, not because he agreed, but because he didn't have to. The law was on my side. Every signature, every date, every clause. My grandfather had named me as the rightful heir. And for 12 years they lived like that page. didn't exist, they left me behind, I said, my voice steady. Now I've returned, not to be part of their lives, but to close the chapter they refused to finish. There was a long pause. I see, he said finally, then I'll advise my clients to vacate the property within the 30-day period. Good, he gathered his papers, but just before leaving, he looked back at me. Can I ask something? Why not just take the money, sell the house, walk away? It was a fair question, a logical one. But it showed he didn't understand any of this. This isn't about the house, I said. It's about being erased. It's about making sure they know that the girl they left at that gas station survived. And that she remembers. He nodded slowly, as if trying to read more from my face than I was giving, but I'd said what mattered. After the meeting, I walked out into the sunlight. The city buzzed around me. Busy and unbothered, I stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of it all, not as a burden but as a presence, a full circle breath. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a forgotten child waiting for someone to care. I was a woman who had faced every door that was slammed in her face, and found another way in. Later that week, I received confirmation that the court had finalized my claim. The house was officially transferred. The trust was now fully under my name. There were no more signatures to gather, no more loopholes, no more waiting. And when I walked through the front door again, it was with the quiet dignity of someone who didn't need to raise their voice to be heard. The rooms looked the same, the framed photos on the mantel, the worn carpet, the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and old fabric, but the energy had shifted. They were gone, not just out of the house, but out of my story. I didn't cry, I didn't feel the need to scream or shatter anything. Instead, I walked through each room, one by one, with my hand brushing gently across the walls. I was reclaiming more than space, I was reclaiming my existence. The house was quiet now, not the kind of tense, loaded silence I had grown up with, the silence of people biting back what they really meant. This was a different quiet, clean, uninhabited, honest. It was the first time the walls weren't pressing in on me. The Langleys had moved out a few days earlier. I didn't watch them pack. I didn't show up to see the truck in the driveway or Helen clutching boxes of heirlooms she never earned. I didn't need to. Their leaving wasn't the climax. It wasn't even interesting, it was just overdue. What mattered was that I walked into that house with a key in my hand and no one's permission in my mouth. Room by room, I stripped the place of its shadows. I pulled down the brittle, smiling family portraits and set them aside. I opened the windows and let the wind carry out what was left of them, the air stale from years of pretending. I donated the furniture, repainted the walls, tore out the carpet they had argued over for weeks one summer when I was 10. Well, I watched from the stairs and hoped someone would remember I was there. It didn't hurt the way I thought it might. There was no wave of sorrow, no sudden grief, just this calm realization. They were never really mine to grieve. I had spent so long mourning people who were still alive, people who had simply made a choice, and now, for the first time, I made one of my own. I didn't want to live there. I didn't want their kitchen or their bedroom or even the quiet backyard. I used to stare at through the window, imagining I could run far enough to find something better. I had already found something better me, but I also didn't want to sell the house. I wanted to change what it stood for. I converted the living room into a workspace. Where their old sofa once sat, I placed a desk. On the wall above it, I framed the will, the one that named me, the one they tried to bury. I kept it there not to gloat, but to remind myself paper can be ignored, but truth waits. I filed for a business license. I built a website. I named the practice after Raymond Langley and Langley Legal Advocacy, even though there was only one of me. I liked the symmetry. I liked knowing that for once, the name stood for something decent. I started small, pro bono consultations, paperwork help, advice clinics. I put up flyers at community centers and shelters, the same places I had slept in and cycled through for years. I met girls who had stories like mine left behind, dismissed, told they were too much or too little, always the wrong thing at the wrong time. I didn't tell them my full story, not at first, but I listened. I offered what I could, and they kept coming. Some of them didn't have ID, some didn't know how to fill out forms. Some were scared of their own names. I remembered what that felt like. I remembered not knowing who I was outside of rejection, and I remembered the slow, painful joy of reclaiming it. People started noticing. A local reporter wrote a short feature on the practice. Donations came in. A retired lawyer offered to mentor me on nonprofit work. One of my professors from law school reached out. Stunned and proud, I never expected any of it. I hadn't set out to inspire anyone. I had just wanted to stand upright in a world that once made me crawl. But somehow, standing made others rise too. Meanwhile, I heard whispers about the Langleys. David's pride had taken a hit he couldn't hide. He told his friends some vague story about legal confusion, about technicalities. Helen had moved in with a cousin temporarily. Emily had gone quiet on social media. Their pictures were still smiling, but something behind the eyes had faded. It didn't satisfy me. It didn't have to. Their downfall wasn't a spectacle. It wasn't even my concern. What mattered was that I had risen, not out of spite, not out of vengeance, but out of love for the girl they left behind. The girl who had no one. The girl who sat at that gas station and refused to disappear. She didn't just survive, she thrived. And every case I took, every voice I helped reclaim, every document I signed under the letterhead that bore my name, it all whispered the same thing back to me, again and again, louder each time: you were never disposable. There's something strange about returning to a place that once broke you, and finding that it no longer holds the power to do so. I had walked through every room of that house more times than I could count as a child, tiptoeing, shrinking, hoping to be seen, but now, each step I took was mine. Not one of them remained, not a voice, not a shadow, not even a trace of their scent in the air. And in that emptiness, I found something I never expected. Peace. It came softly in the mornings, when I made coffee in the same kitchen where I'd once stood, waiting for scraps of attention. In the evenings, when I worked late at my desk with the windows open, hearing the wind instead of silence. I stopped flinching when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I stopped expecting tension at the dinner table. The house no longer whispered reminders of who I was in single quotas. It simply let me be who I had become. I kept the upstairs bedroom that had once been mine. I didn't redesign it or paint over everything. I didn't erase the past. Instead, I made space for the girl I had been, and I let her rest. I placed a photo of myself on the nightstand. One taken years after they'd left me at my law school graduation, my eyes clear, my smile real. That was the girl who found her way back, and this time, I made room for her. Anne Langley grew faster than I expected. What started as a quiet practice turned into a community. I hired a paralegal who had aged out of the foster system like I had. I partnered with counselors and housing advocates. I started speaking at events, reluctantly at first, then with more confidence as I realized how many people needed to hear what I had once needed to hear myself, that their story wasn't over just because someone else stopped reading it, that survival wasn't shameful, that strength didn't always look like power, it often looked like persistence. And slowly, this house that once held silence and secrets began to fill with something else: laughter, conversation, hope. There were evenings when the office was filled with the quiet hum of printers and the buzz of coffee mugs against tabletops. There were moments when someone sat across from me, eyes full of worry, and left a little taller than they came in. That mattered more than anything the Langleys ever gave or denied me. Sometimes I thought about reaching out to them, not to forgive, not to mend, just to say it out loud, that I had made it, that I was more than the girl they abandoned. But every time I thought about it, I realized I didn't need to. They had chosen silence, and I had found my voice elsewhere. One day, as I was locking up the office, I passed by the old guest room, the one they never let me use, the one that was always Emily's spare in case she brought a friend. Now it had soft lighting, a fold-out couch, and a shelf full of legal resources. On the door was a small sign: client room, for anyone who needs a moment. I stood there for a while. I thought about the version of me who had needed that room. The 13-year-old who would have given anything for someone to say, "You can rest here. You matter. You're not alone." I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was warm, still. A little worn, a little imperfect, like healing. I sat down on the couch, leaned back, and let myself feel the full weight of the journey. Not the pain of it, but the strength, the choice to keep going, even when no one was watching. The courage to build, brick by careful brick, a life that belonged to me. That was what they never understood. When they left me at that gas station, they thought they were closing a chapter. Maybe they thought I'd vanish, or blend into the background of someone else's story. But I didn't. I wrote my own. They gave up on me, but I never gave up on me. And now? In the house they once ruled with cold affection and conditional love, I had built something they couldn't touch, not with their excuses, not with their apologies, not even with their regrets. I didn't come back to be their family, I came back to become fully myself. And I did not with fury but with fire, not with noise but with truth, not to hurt them, but to show the world, and that little girl's still inside me, what happens when you're left behind, and you decide not to break but to rise.